They laughed as they tossed my dinner in the trash. I still hear the clatter of the dish, the scrape of the fork against the porcelain, the careless way the food I had spent hours preparing slid into the garbage can as though it were nothing but scraps. My son didn't even look at me when he did it. His wife giggled, covering her mouth with one hand, and said something about how no one could eat that heavy food so late at night. The sound of her laugh stung more than the act itself. It was the kind of laugh people use when they know they have an audience, when they want someone to take their side. My granddaughter followed suit, rolling her eyes and smirking in that way teenagers do when they think they've inherited authority from the adults around them. 3 generations under my roof, and not one of them paused to ask me how I felt watching the meal I had planned and cooked slide into the bin. I didn't say a word. I stood there with my hands still damp from rinsing vegetables, a dish towel twisted between my fingers. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs still lingered in the air, warm and inviting, though no one had bothered to taste it. My knees ached from standing at the counter all afternoon, peeling potatoes and chopping onions, but none of that seemed to matter. They'd already eaten earlier, they said. They had grabbed something quick at the drive-thru. No one thought to call me. No one thought to save room. They had let me fuss and cook in season, all the while knowing they wouldn't touch a bite. When my son scraped the plate into the trash, he made it seem like he was doing me a favor, sparing me from leftovers cluttering the fridge. But it didn't feel like a favor. It felt like erasure. I wiped my hands on the towel and busied myself with the counter, anything to avoid the burn in my chest. I heard them move into the living room, voices mingling with the sound of the television. Laughter carried easily across the small house, each burst of it a reminder that I wasn't part of their world anymore, not really. I was the one who paid the mortgage, who kept the lights on, who folded their laundry when they forgot. And yet, in my own kitchen, in my own home, I had been dismissed like an unwanted guest. I set the towel down and stared at the kitchen window. The glass reflected my face faintly, lined and tired, hair pulled back in a loose bun. There was no anger there, only the heaviness of recognition. I had let this build slowly, one small dismissal after another. A joke at my expense brushed off as harmless. A family outing planned without telling me until the last moment. My things moved to make space for theirs, my routines adjusted to fit their convenience. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. Families go through rough patches, I reminded myself. They were saving money, trying to get on their feet. I wanted to help. That was what mothers did, wasn't it? We bent so the younger ones could stand straighter. But bending, over time, feels an awful lot like breaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the hallway clock, the faint murmur of voices still awake long after I turned out my light. Every sound pressed against me. I thought of the food cooling in the trash, of my son's casual dismissal, of my daughter-in-law's laugh. I thought of the mortgage statements stacked neatly in my desk drawer, all addressed to me. And I thought of the line I had never wanted to cross, the one between being generous and being a fool. The morning came heavy and gray. I rose early, out of habit, and made coffee. The kitchen felt colder than usual, though maybe that was just me. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug, staring at the steam rising in faint curls. I remembered how, years ago, this same table had been the heart of our family. My husband and I had saved for it, choosing one large enough to seat everyone, imagining Thanksgivings and birthdays and long evenings of card games. He was gone now, and with him went the warmth that used to fill these walls. What remained were shadows of those memories, thin and brittle against the weight of how things really were. I listened as the others woke one by one, the thud of feet on the hallway floor, the bathroom door opening and closing, drawers sliding shut. My granddaughter drifted through the kitchen without a word, grabbed a granola bar, and left a trail of crumbs behind her. My daughter-in-law followed, scrolling on her phone, pausing only to complain about the weak Wi-Fi. My son came last, dressed for work, sipping the coffee I had brewed without acknowledgement. They moved around me like I was a piece of furniture, necessary, but unremarkable. By the time they left, the house was littered with evidence of them: shoes kicked under the bench, a blanket crumpled on the couch, dishes in the sink they had walked past. I washed the dishes, folded the blanket, lined up the shoes. It was muscle memory by now. But as I wiped the counter, something in me paused. My hand stilled, cloth pressed against the laminate. I thought of how easy it would be to stop. To let the dishes pile up, the laundry sour, the bills go unpaid. But I knew I wouldn't. That wasn't who I was. Yet the thought lingered, surprising me with its sharpness. That afternoon, I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the folder where I kept the house documents. The weight of it was solid in my hands. I hadn't looked at these papers in a long time, not really. Mortgage paid off. Taxes current. Title in my name alone. I spread them across the desk, running my fingers along the embossed seals, the signatures that carried my life into the shape it had become. This house was mine. Not theirs. Mine. The reality was so simple it startled me. I had been treating myself as though I were the guest here, tiptoeing around their moods, their needs. But it wasn't me who was out of place. That night, when they came home, I stayed quiet again. I cooked nothing, served nothing, set no table. They ate fast food in front of the television, grease-stained bags crinkling in their laps. My daughter-in-law made another comment about my old-fashioned recipes, and my son chuckled as though agreeing was easier than defending me. I sat at the kitchen table, silent, sipping tea. If they noticed, they said nothing. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I thought about the years of effort that had built this house, my husband's long shifts, my own hours of sewing, babysitting, scrimping wherever I could. Every brick, every tile carried a piece of us. And now it was treated like a crash pad, a convenience. I thought about the laughter as my dinner was thrown away. That sound replayed, sharp and mocking, until my chest ached. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, the decision took root. Not in anger, not in spite, but in something steadier. A reclamation. The following day, I drove to the office supply store. I bought a new pen, thick paper, and an envelope. It felt almost ceremonial. Back home, I laid them on the desk beside the folder of house papers. My hands trembled slightly, but not from hesitation. It was the weight of finally seeing a choice I had been blind to for too long. I didn't write the notice that day. Not yet. I let the thought breathe, stretch, settle into me. I went about the week quietly, watching more closely. The way they used my house as though it were theirs, but without the responsibility. The way my daughter-in-law scrolled past me in conversations, answering questions addressed to me as though I weren't there. The way my son avoided eye contact when she dismissed me, unwilling to challenge her. And my granddaughter, mimicking their disregard, treating me not like a grandmother but like a relic. Each moment pressed deeper into the truth. I was invisible in my own home. And invisibility, I realized, was worse than loneliness. By the end of the week, I had rehearsed the words in my head enough times that they no longer scared me. The pen felt solid between my fingers as I bent to the page. My handwriting wavered at first, but then grew stronger with each line. The notice was short, direct, and final. I read it aloud once, my voice steady in the quiet room. When I folded the paper and slipped it into the envelope, a strange calm washed over me. Not joy. Not relief. Something quieter. Like setting down a heavy load I had been carrying for far too long. I placed the envelope in the desk drawer, waiting. Timing mattered. They would need to see not just the words but the conviction behind them. I had waited this long. I could wait a little longer. But even as I closed the drawer, I knew the line had been crossed the night they laughed. There was no going back. The days that followed blurred together, though not from peace. If anything, the atmosphere in the house thickened, pressing down like a storm cloud that never released its rain. Their laughter had left an echo, and I couldn't unhear it. I carried it with me from room to room, as real as the creak in my knees or the stiffness in my hands. On Tuesday, I found my sewing basket tipped over in the living room. Spools of thread rolled beneath the couch, pins scattered like grit across the floor. I asked my granddaughter about it, and she shrugged without looking up from her phone. "We were moving the coffee table for TikTok," she said. "Your stuff was in the way." No apology. No glance backward as she swept past me. I gathered the scattered bits one by one, pricking my thumb on a stray needle. A bead of blood surfaced, sharp red against my skin. I pressed it with a tissue, thinking how fitting it was, a tiny wound for a larger cut no one else could see. That same evening, my daughter-in-law rearranged the pantry. "It's too cluttered," she declared, tossing cans into a box she said she'd donate. I watched as jars I'd preserved with care, peaches from the summer, plum jam I had stirred until my arm ached, were shoved aside. "Nobody eats this stuff," she said with a wrinkle of her nose. She stacked protein bars and instant noodles in their place. My son hovered nearby, nodding, saying nothing. When I reached later for a jar of peaches, the box was gone. I started noticing how quickly my presence was erased. A vase I kept on the dining table was moved to a shelf. The quilt I draped over the couch was folded and tucked into a closet. Photographs of my husband and me, once framed proudly on the mantel, vanished. When I asked, my daughter-in-law smiled thinly. "We're just freshening up the space. You know, making it more modern." She used that word, modern, like a weapon. As if anything belonging to me was automatically out of date, a relic to be hidden away. It was Thursday when I took my first small step. I locked my bedroom door. The old brass key was cool in my hand, and the click of the lock sounded louder than I expected. For the first time in months, maybe years, I breathed deeply as I sat on my bed, knowing they couldn't enter without my say-so. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out the envelope with the notice inside. I didn't unfold it. I just touched it, tracing the crease. It was enough to remind myself that I still had choices. That night, they ordered pizza and left the greasy boxes on the counter. I cleaned them up in silence, as always, but this time I didn't wipe the counters until they gleamed. I left the streaks, the crumbs. A test, perhaps, to see if anyone else noticed. No one did. By morning, the mess was still there. I brewed my coffee and sat at the table, staring at the sticky rings left behind by their soda cans. A part of me hardened. The next day, I walked to the corner store. It wasn't far, just a few blocks, but it felt like stepping into another life. The crisp air brushed my cheeks, the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakery mingled with the faint tang of gasoline from the street. I bought myself a scarf, soft wool in a shade of deep blue. I hadn't bought something for myself in a long time. As I draped it around my shoulders, the fabric warmed me in more ways than one. It was mine. Chosen for no one else's approval, no one else's use. Mine. On my way home, I stopped by the post office. I asked, casually, about certified mail. The clerk explained the process, sliding a form across the counter. I nodded, folding it into my purse. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From readiness. When I returned, I found my daughter-in-law in the kitchen, clearing space in the cupboards. My grandmother's teapot, white porcelain with a crack running down the side, sat on the edge of the counter, perilously close to falling. "We don't need this junk," she said. My hand shot out before I could think, steadying the pot and pulling it close. My voice came sharper than I intended. "This stays." She blinked, surprised, then shrugged with that dismissive laugh of hers. "Suit yourself. Just don't expect anyone to use it." I carried the teapot to my room that night, setting it on my dresser beside the envelope. Its crack was visible in the lamplight, but it still held beauty, still held history. A flaw didn't erase its worth. I touched the porcelain gently, as though reassuring both it and myself. Saturday brought another insult, though by then I had learned to let the sting wash over me. My son announced they were thinking of redoing the backyard. We could put in a fire pit, he said, spreading his arms as though he were the master of the space. My husband had planted rosebushes there, each one carefully tended, each bloom carrying the memory of summers we had shared. The roses will have to go, my son added casually, glancing at his wife for approval. I said nothing in the moment, but that night, under the cover of darkness, I walked out and touched each rosebush, running my fingers along the thorns. I whispered apologies to them, promises too. The following week, my resolve deepened. I stopped cooking meals. At first, they didn't notice. They brought home takeout, filled the fridge with containers, left wrappers on the counter. But after a few days, my granddaughter complained. "There's nothing here I want," she whined. My daughter-in-law shot me a look, sharp as glass. "She needs proper meals," she said, as though I hadn't been the one cooking them all along. My son shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. That night, I boiled a pot of soup for myself only. The smell of simmering broth filled the house. My granddaughter peeked in, asking if there was enough for her. I met her eyes, steady. "This is mine," I said. The words tasted strange, but powerful. She huffed and stormed out, muttering under her breath. I ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. For once, I didn't clear their mess when I finished. I washed only my dish, leaving the rest. It was a small rebellion, but it mattered. Each act of holding back, of choosing myself, built a kind of strength I hadn't felt in years. The envelope in the drawer no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a promise. Still, doubt crept in at night. I would lie awake, listening to the house breathe around me, and wonder if I was cruel. A mother shouldn't cast her child out, should she? But then I'd remember the laughter, the sight of my dinner in the trash, the absence of my husband's photo on the mantel. I would remember how invisible I had become. And I knew, cruelty wasn't asking for respect. Cruelty was what they had been doing, day after day, until I had almost forgotten I deserved better. By the end of that second week, I had packed a box of my most precious things and hidden it in the closet. Not because I was leaving, but because I needed to remind myself that I could keep safe what mattered. My husband's watch. My wedding band. Letters he had written me in the early years. A photograph of my parents. Each piece went into the box with care, sealed not just with tape but with intention. The house grew noisier with them, but inside me, a quiet center formed. I no longer moved around them like a shadow. I began to take up space again, brewing coffee in the middle of the afternoon, playing the radio softly while I folded my clothes, humming as I swept the porch. None of it was dramatic, but it was mine. One evening, as I set my teacup down, my son asked if I could pitch in for the Wi-Fi upgrade they wanted. I looked at him, really looked, and let silence stretch between us. Finally, I said, no. His surprise was almost comical. "But Mom," he began, and I cut him off gently. No, that was all. I stood and left the room. My hands shook afterward, but only from the rush of it. The simple power of saying no. That night, I unlocked the drawer and pulled out the envelope again. This time, I didn't just touch it. I placed it on the table beside my teacup, where it stayed until morning. Each time I walked past it, I glanced down, reminding myself what waited. The roses bloomed late that season, stubborn against the weather. I clipped a few stems and placed them in the cracked porcelain teapot, setting it on my dresser. Their scent filled the room, delicate and strong all at once. I inhaled deeply, feeling steadier with each breath. I was almost ready. The envelope no longer hid in the drawer. I kept it on my nightstand now, its presence steady beside the lamp. Some mornings, I would brush my fingertips over it as though it were a talisman, a reminder of strength waiting inside me. Other mornings, I ignored it deliberately, testing myself to see if the decision would falter in the light of day. It never did. If anything, the quiet conviction grew stronger. It was on a Sunday morning when the next fracture appeared. My daughter-in-law had invited her sister over without telling me. I came into the kitchen to find them laughing at the counter, sipping coffee from mugs I hadn't even known they'd taken from the cupboard. My granddaughter sprawled on the couch, her phone propped up, recording them as they danced to some song blaring from the television. The house felt like it belonged to strangers. When I asked gently if they'd be staying for lunch, my daughter-in-law gave me a look, not unkind, but dismissive, like a clerk brushing off a customer. "We'll probably order in. Don't worry about it." I stood there, hands resting on the back of a chair, and realized I wasn't being asked anymore. I was being informed. My kitchen, my pantry, my table, none of it felt mine in that moment. They had taken it over so seamlessly I hadn't noticed the line crossing until I was already on the other side. That afternoon, I walked to the park. It was chilly, the kind of crisp air that made the tips of my fingers ache, but I welcomed it. I sat on a bench and watched children chase each other across the grass, their laughter high and untamed. A father lifted his son to reach the monkey bars, patient and steady. I thought of my own son at that age, how he used to cling to me, how his eyes once lit up at the sight of me. Somewhere along the way, that light had dimmed. Somewhere along the way, I had become an obstacle instead of a home. When I returned, the house smelled of fried food. Grease hung in the air, coating everything. Empty bags littered the counter, and my daughter-in-law's sister lounged in my chair at the table, scrolling through her phone. No one looked up when I entered. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My chest ached, not from anger, but from something heavier, a mourning, almost, for what had been lost. The next morning, I began moving things. Quietly, carefully. The teapot stayed in my room, but I added the quilt too, folding it neatly at the foot of my bed. My husband's photo came next, then the vase, then a stack of books I loved. Little by little, the house shrank around them, and I carved out a corner that was wholly mine again. They didn't notice. Or if they did, they didn't comment. But they noticed when I stopped driving them places. My granddaughter asked me to drop her at a friend's house after school, and I shook my head. "Not today." She blinked at me, confused. "Why not?" she demanded. I met her gaze evenly. "Because I don't want to." She scoffed, muttering something about me being selfish. I didn't flinch. For years, I had bent myself into shapes to avoid disappointing them. But the word no had become easier now, smoother on my tongue. One evening, I overheard my son and his wife whispering in the kitchen. Their voices carried, though they tried to keep them low. "She's getting strange," my daughter-in-law said. "It's like she's trying to make a point." My son sighed. "She'll come around. She always does." I leaned against my bedroom door, listening. The certainty in his voice stung. He still believed I would fold, as I always had. He didn't see that something had already shifted. I wasn't folding anymore. I was standing straighter, piece by piece. That week, I pulled the roses from the yard again, clipping a small bundle to bring inside. Their scent filled my room, their thorns pricking at my fingers. They reminded me of resilience, of beauty that could bloom even when neglected. I set them in the teapot and watched as their petals slowly unfurled. Then came the night that pushed everything closer to the edge. I had gone to bed early, the house noisy as ever with the television blaring. Near midnight, a crash jolted me awake. I rushed to the kitchen to find my daughter-in-law rummaging through the cupboards, searching for something. A glass had fallen, shards glittering across the floor. She cursed under her breath, then turned when she saw me. "Do you have a broom?" she asked, as though I were a tenant in her space. I pointed silently to the closet. She swept quickly, carelessly, leaving splinters behind. My son appeared, yawning, asking what the commotion was. She waved it off. "Nothing. Just your mom's clutter getting in the way." I froze. Clutter. That was what my presence had been reduced to. I went back to my room and sat on the bed, trembling. The word rattled inside me like a loose coin in a jar. Clutter. Not mother. Not caretaker. Not woman who held this house together. Just clutter. Something to be cleared away. The next morning, I brewed my coffee and sat at the table. They came and went around me, their routines unchanged, their disregard steady. But inside me, something had solidified. I glanced at the envelope on the counter, no longer hidden, no longer just a thought. I didn't hand it to them that day. But I kept it in plain sight. Each time they passed, I watched their eyes slide over it without curiosity. They didn't see it, not really. That, too, told me everything I needed to know. The time was coming. I could feel it. The envelope stayed on the counter for 3 days. I didn't hide it, didn't tuck it under a pile of mail. It lay there in plain sight, its edges crisp, its presence undeniable to me. Yet no one in the house seemed to notice. They moved past it with their takeout bags, their phones, their careless chatter. It was almost laughable how something so heavy to me was invisible to them, just as I had become invisible. On the second day, my granddaughter finally asked. She picked it up absent-mindedly, flipping it between her fingers. "What's this?" she said. I reached over and took it back, slow but steady. "Something important," I replied. My voice didn't waver, though my heart pounded. She shrugged and walked away, not caring enough to press further. That told me everything. It was later that evening when my son asked if I could move my car out of the driveway more often. "It's just in the way," he said, scratching at his neck as if embarrassed. I looked at him, trying to read the man I had raised in the boy I once knew. The one who clutched my hand at the bus stop. The one who asked for another bedtime story, even when his eyelids drooped. But now, standing in my kitchen, he couldn't meet my eyes. My car. My driveway. My home. And I was in the way. I said nothing then, but I felt the steel of the envelope pressing against me from the counter, urging me toward the inevitable. That night, I made myself a small meal, scrambled eggs, toast, a few slices of tomato. Simple, nothing extravagant. As I ate, they came home with burgers and fries, dropping wrappers onto the counter. My daughter-in-law glanced at my plate and smirked. "You really eat like an old woman," she said. My son chuckled softly, though he looked tired. I chewed slowly, refusing to let her words cut deeper than they already had. Each bite was an act of defiance, even if they didn't know it. Later, as I washed my dish, I found myself humming. A soft tune my husband used to whistle when he worked in the yard. The sound startled me at first, it had been so long since music of any kind had come from me. My daughter-in-law paused in the hallway, listening. "What's that supposed to be?" she asked, her tone sharp. I turned off the faucet and looked at her. "Happiness," I said. Her brow furrowed, but she said nothing more. The next morning, I woke before dawn and walked out to the garden. The roses glistened with dew, their petals heavy with it, bending but unbroken. I clipped a few stems and carried them inside, placing them in the cracked teapot on my dresser. Their scent filled the room, delicate yet strong, reminding me of what still endured, no matter the neglect. That afternoon, my daughter-in-law announced she wanted to repaint the living room. "Something brighter," she said, flipping through swatches. My son nodded along, distracted, as if agreeing cost him less than opposing her. I looked around at the walls my husband and I had painted years ago, the soft cream color we had chosen together. The idea of it being erased tightened my chest. "No," I said quietly, but firmly. They both turned to me, surprised. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, a laugh at the edge of her voice. I met her gaze. "This is my house. The walls stay as they are." The silence that followed was sharp. My son shifted, uneasy. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes. "Fine. Whatever." But I saw it in her expression, resentment, calculation. She wasn't used to me pushing back. That night, I sat at my desk with the envelope open in front of me. I reread the words I had written. They were plain, not cruel, but resolute. My handwriting was steady, each line etched with the clarity I had been building for weeks. I folded it again, slid it back inside, and pressed the flap closed. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow. But the moment came sooner than I expected. The next evening, I returned from the store to find the roses gone from the yard. Every bush had been cut down to stubs, their blossoms tossed in a pile by the fence. My granddaughter, phone in hand, laughed as she filmed herself twirling near the wreckage. "We're making space for the fire pit," she announced proudly. My daughter-in-law cheered her on, clapping. My son stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. The world tilted. The roses my husband had planted with such care, the roses I had whispered to just nights before, they were gone, reduced to trash for the sake of someone else's convenience. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked past them, into the house, straight to my room. I opened the drawer, took out the envelope, and held it in my hand. My fingers didn't tremble this time. The weight of it felt right, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. When I walked back into the living room, they barely glanced up from the television. My granddaughter scrolled through her phone, my daughter-in-law sprawled on the couch, my son rubbing at his temples. I stood in the doorway, envelope in hand, and felt the stillness settle over me. I didn't speak yet. Not then. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. The roses might have been cut down, but something else had taken root in their place. Something stronger. Something final. The roses lay in a heap outside, their petals already wilting, bruised from careless hands. I could still smell them faintly through the open window, sweetness mixed with the sting of loss. But instead of breaking me, the sight steadied me. It stripped away the last of my hesitation. That night, I didn't cook. I didn't clean. I poured myself a cup of tea, carried it to the table, and set the envelope down beside it. The lamp cast a soft glow across the paper, its edges sharp against the wood. I let it sit there in full view while they came home, while they bustled about with grocery bags and chatter. My daughter-in-law noticed first. "What's that?" she asked, her tone flat, almost annoyed. "This," I said quietly, sliding it toward her, "is for all of you." She frowned, tore it open without ceremony, and scanned the page. At first, confusion flickered across her face, then disbelief, then anger. "You can't be serious," she snapped. My son leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he read. My granddaughter drifted closer, curiosity pulling her in, until she too was staring at the words. Silence filled the room, heavy and sharp. My son was the first to speak. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "what is this supposed to mean?" "It means," I replied, steady though my hands curled against my teacup, "that this is my home. And I will not be treated as if I don't exist in it any longer. You need to leave. All of you." His face twisted, a storm of emotions passing through. Shock. Frustration. Guilt, perhaps, buried too deep to surface cleanly. "You can't just," he began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "I can," I said. "And I have." My daughter-in-law scoffed, tossing the paper onto the table. "This is ridiculous. We've been here for months. We've made this place livable again. You need us." The words stung, but I didn't let them land. "No," I said firmly. "I don't. You needed me. And I let you. But now, I need peace. I need respect. And I won't find either with you here." My granddaughter shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked, her voice thinner than usual, stripped of its sharpness. For a moment, I saw the child she had once been, the girl who used to curl in my lap and ask for stories. My heart ached. But I didn't waver. That, I said gently, is for your parents to figure out. The room bristled. My daughter-in-law muttered something under her breath, her tone laced with contempt. My son tried again, softer this time. Mom, please. Don't do this. We'll try harder. We'll fix things. I met his eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't see my little boy. I saw a man who had grown comfortable in my silence, in my giving. A man who had forgotten what it meant to respect the hand that had raised him. It's already broken, I said quietly. And I won't live like this anymore. No one spoke after that. The television hummed faintly in the background, its noise absurd against the weight of what had just been said. My tea had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. It grounded me. They left the envelope on the table when they retreated to their rooms. I stayed there long after, the house finally quiet, finally still. My heart hurt, yes, but not with regret. With release. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. The days after the notice were strained, hushed in a way the house hadn't been in months. Their voices, once so loud and careless, fell softer. My granddaughter no longer blared music in the mornings. My daughter-in-law no longer spread her things across the kitchen. Even my son, who had always carried himself with a certain tired authority, moved quietly, his eyes avoiding mine. The silence was not peace. It was heavy, expectant, like the air before a storm breaks. Boxes began to appear in corners, half filled with clothes and books. The television stayed off more often, as if they didn't quite know how to fill the space anymore. They were waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. One evening, my son knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it to find him standing there, shoulders slumped, hands shoved deep into his pockets. For a moment, he looked like the boy I remembered, nervous after breaking something he couldn't fix. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, "are you sure about this?" I held his gaze. "Yes." He nodded, eyes flickering downward. I didn't realize how much we hurt you." His words carried no defense, no excuses. Just a tired honesty that felt long overdue. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "You stopped seeing me," I said softly. "I was here every day, but you treated me like furniture. Like clutter." The word tasted bitter. His face flinched at it, as though hearing it from me finally forced him to understand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For a moment, I wanted to reach out, to tell him it was all right. But it wasn't. Not yet. Perhaps not ever in the way he hoped. So I simply nodded and closed the door gently between us. They moved out a week later. The morning of their leaving was gray and damp, a drizzle tapping lightly on the roof. I stood at the window as they carried boxes to the car, their movements hurried, their expressions set in stone. My granddaughter avoided looking back at the house. My daughter-in-law slammed the trunk with more force than necessary. My son glanced once toward the porch, but when he saw me watching, he dropped his gaze and climbed into the driver's seat. The car pulled away, its tires splashing through puddles, and then the house was still. Utterly still. I stood in the doorway for a long while, the drizzle misting my hair, the air cool against my skin. The quiet pressed in, both comforting and strange. For months, the house had been filled with noise, with careless laughter, with clutter both physical and unseen. Now there was only the steady drip of rain from the gutters and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Inside, their absence was everywhere. The couch sagged where they had sat night after night. The pantry shelves were bare of their boxes and wrappers. The hallway felt wider, emptier. And yet, beneath the emptiness, I felt something stir. I began by opening the windows. Fresh air swept through the rooms, cool and damp, carrying away the stale heaviness. I scrubbed the counters, washed the floors, shook out the rugs. The work tired me, but it also lit something in me, a rhythm, a purpose I thought I had lost. By evening, the house smelled of soap and lemon, and the air felt lighter. In the living room, I brought out the vase that had been hidden away and placed fresh flowers in it, daffodils from the market. Bright, yellow, unapologetic. On the mantel, I returned the photographs of my husband and me, arranging them where they belonged. His smile greeted me again, steady and sure. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had brought him home. That night, I cooked for myself. Nothing elaborate, roasted chicken, the way I had made it that night when they laughed and tossed it in the trash. I seasoned it carefully, roasted potatoes alongside, and set the table for one. When I sat down to eat, the silence was not lonely. It was mine. Each bite tasted like something earned, something reclaimed. After dinner, I walked to the garden. The roses were gone, their stubs raw and empty against the soil. My chest ached at the sight, but I knelt anyway, running my fingers across the damp earth. "We'll start again," I whispered. And I meant it. I would replant them, tend them, watch them bloom once more. Some things could be broken and remade. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. Mornings with coffee at the table, afternoons in the garden or at the corner store, evenings with a book in my lap and the radio humming softly in the background. The house grew quiet, but it wasn't the silence of erasure anymore. It was the silence of ownership, of presence. Sometimes, I thought of them. I wondered if my granddaughter missed the stories I used to tell, if my son regretted the words he never said, if my daughter-in-law still rolled her eyes when my name came up. I didn't know. I might never know. But I no longer lived on their terms. One afternoon, as I sipped tea from the cracked porcelain teapot, I realized something simple. The roses, the photos, the meals, these things were not just habits or tokens of the past. They were anchors. Reminders that I was not clutter. I was not invisible. I was the foundation of this home, the one who had built it, held it, sustained it. And I had taken it back. The pain lingered, yes. It always would. Family wounds don't vanish with a piece of paper or an emptied room. But alongside the pain came something steadier, peace. That evening, I lit a candle on the table, letting its glow warm the room. The flame flickered against the photographs, against the flowers, against the walls that stayed the color I had chosen with my husband years ago. I sat there for a long while, breathing in the quiet, listening to the hum of the house. I thought of the night when they laughed as they threw my dinner away, how small and unseen I had felt. And I thought of this night, where every detail, every plate, every picture, every breath, was mine again. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't bitterness. It was something softer, steadier. A reclamation. And as I blew out the candle, the smoke curling upward in a thin gray ribbon, I whispered into the stillness, "I am not in the way. I am home."